17. Restitution to God. Another aspect of the law of restitution appears in two interesting laws. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, If a soul commit a trespass and sin through ignorance in the holy things of the Lord, then he shall bring for his trespass unto the Lord a ram without blemish out of the flocks, with thy estimation by shekels of silver, after the shekel of the sanctuary, for a trespass offering. And he shall make amends for the harm that he hath done in the holy thing, and shall add the fifth part thereto, and give it unto the priest. And the priest shall make an atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering, and it shall be forgiven him. Leviticus 5:14-16. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, When a man or woman shall commit any sin that men commit, to do a trespass against the Lord, and that person be guilty, then they shall confess their sin which they have done, and he shall recompense his trespass with the principal thereof, and add unto it the fifth part thereof, and give it unto him against whom he hath trespassed. But if the man have no kinsman to recompense trespass unto, let the trespass be recompensed unto the Lord, even to the priest, beside the ram of the atonement, whereby an atonement shall be made for him. And every offering of all the holy things of the children of Israel, which they bring unto the priest, shall be his. And every man's hallowed things shall be his. Whatsoever any man giveth the priest, it shall be his. Numbers 5:5-10. In the Leviticus passage, the reference according to Ginsburg is to, quote, inadvertently keeping back the things which belong to the sanctuary and to the service of the Lord, as for instance, the tithes, the firstfruits, or not consecrating or redeeming his firstborn, Exodus 28:38, Numbers 5:6-8, end quote. The reference is to the holy gifts, sacrifices, firstfruits, tithes, etc., which were to be offered to Jehovah, and were assigned by him to the priests for their revenue. It means, quote, to sin in anything by taking away from Jehovah that which belonged to him, end quote. It does not refer to deliberate sin, but to a trespass committed in a forgetful or negligent way. A trespass offering, compensation for the amount of the tithe or offering due, plus a fifth of the amount more as penalty, was the required restitution. In the Numbers passage, the reference is to a similar offense, but in this case against a neighbor. The Talmud stressed the reference in 5:6 to woman, when a man or woman shall commit any sin, declaring that women are also subject to the law of torts. At any rate, the natural inference, by virtue of its echo of Leviticus 5:14-16, is that here again minor inadvertent offenses are referred to. Serious guilt, such as a runaway fire, is dealt with elsewhere in the law. Here the offenses are real, but neither capital nor major. The noun ma'al, trespass, here used, together with its cognate verb, quote, implies stealth or secrecy in action, end quote. Through carelessness or neglect, a man or woman sinning against a neighbor then guiltily conceals the offense. Restitution, however, must be made, and when found guilty, the person must make an offering of atonement, make restitution, and add a fifth of its value to his restitution. It is possible, in times of turmoil or of sudden death, for an offender to find no one left to make restitution to. The family is dead or has moved out of the country and no relatives survive. In such cases, restitution is made to the priest or pastor. The guilty party, in coming forward to confess his guilt voluntarily, is protected in his confession. Quote, these gifts could be personal, so that they needed not to flow into the temple treasury. By this it was made possible for these cases of guilt to be treated more confidentially, which also gave the greater encouragement to the confession of guilt and to restitution, end quote. Many commentators refer the sins of this law to Leviticus 6:2-3, but this is clearly a separate law, although closely related. It would appear that Numbers 5:5-10 refers to sins of negligence and inadvertence, as does Leviticus 5:14-16, whereas Leviticus 6:1-7 refers to minor offenses of a deliberate nature involving property. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, If a soul sin and commit a trespass against the Lord, and lie unto his neighbor in that which was delivered him to keep, or in fellowship, or in a thing taken away by violence, or hath deceived his neighbor, or have found that which was lost, and lieth concerning it, and sweareth falsely, in any of all these that a man doeth, sinning therein, then it shall be, because he hath sinned and is guilty, that he shall restore that which he took violently away, or the thing which he hath deceitfully gotten, or that which was delivered him to keep, or the lost thing which he found, or all that about which he hath sworn falsely. He shall even restore it in the principal, and shall add the fifth part more thereto. and give it unto him to whom it appertaineth in the day of his trespass offering. And he shall bring his trespass offering unto the Lord, a ram without blemish out of the flock, with thy estimation, for a trespass offering unto the priest. And the priest shall make an atonement for him before the Lord, and it shall be forgiven him for anything of all that he hath done in trespassing therein. Leviticus 6, 1-7. Although such offenses are called violence, Note points out that in the Hebrew, quote, the context scarcely suggests a forcible robbery or a regular theft, but rather some deceptive way of appropriating someone else's property, end quote. In all three of these laws, certain common legal principles appear. The first is clearly the fact that restitution must be made to God. In Exodus 22, 1-14, the basic laws of restitution are given, but these laws have no reference to a trespass offering to the Lord, as we find in Leviticus 5, 14-16, and 6, 1-7, and Numbers 5, 5-10, nor to a sin offering. The general laws of sacrifice assumed such offerings. Why then is it specifically cited in the case of these laws? The very fact of the minor character of these offenses, inadvertence in two cases, and petty offenses in the other, gives us the clue. Marsh has observed of Numbers 5, 5-10 that, quote, while there could be a sin against God alone, any sin against man was also reckoned a sin against God, so that a guilt offering had to be made, end quote. Ginsburg stated it even more plainly, with reference to Leviticus 6, 1-7. Quote, it will be seen that the trespass against God is strictly speaking a violation of the rights of a neighbor's property. As fraud and plunder are most subversive of social life, a crime of this sort is described as an insult to God, who is the founder and sovereign ruler of his people, end quote. The law permits no one to forget that the slightest offense is also an offense against God. By requiring in these cases a restitution to God as well as a restoration of the damaged or misappropriated property, the total jurisdiction of God is asserted, as well as the fact that the slightest breach of order is a breach of God's order. At every point, God's order must be restored. Second, in greater offenses, restitution involves double or fivefold return, here only 20%. In every case, the same principle is at work, which in part certainly involves also the removal of all profit from sin. The law of the Lord removes all profit from stealing and imposes severe penalties upon those who steal. Apart from the law of restitution, crime does very commonly pay. An English professional criminal, asked about the risks involved in his thefts, his prison sentences, and the likelihood of an 8-year prison term when next caught, replied, quote, I don't want to do 8 years, no, but if I have to, I have to, and that's all there is to it. If you're a criminal, what's the alternative to the risk of going to prison? Coal miners don't spend their time worrying about the risk they might get killed by a fall at the coalface either. Prison's an occupational risk, that's all, and one I'm quite prepared to take. I'll willingly gamble away a third of my life in prison, so long as I can live the way I want for the other 2/3. After all, it's my life, and that's how I feel about it. The alternative, the prospect of vegetating the rest of my life away in a steady job, catching the 8:13 to work in the morning and the 5:50 back again at night, all for 10 or 15 quid a week, now that really does terrify me, far more than the thought of a few years in the nick, end quote. This criminal's position was a logical, amoral conclusion. The profit in theft far outweighed the penalty for him. Modern humanistic law does tend to make crime profitable, while at the same time lessening its significance in terms of the moral law. Saxon law dealt brutally with criminals, according to Sir William Blackstone. Quote, our ancient Saxon laws nominally punished theft with death, if above the value of 12 pence, but the criminal was permitted to redeem his life by a pecuniary ransom, as among their ancestors the Germans by a stated number of cattle. But in the 9th year of Henry I, this power of redemption was taken away, and all persons guilty of larceny above the value of 12 pence were directed to be hanged, which law continues in force to this day, end quote. Capital punishment for larceny continued in English law into the reign of George IV, at which time the law was altered. In such a perspective, the law seeks to repress crime by imposing heavy and disproportionate penalties. This is contrary to the biblical law, where restoration is primary, not repression. Both capital punishment and restitution in biblical law are in terms of justice, not repression. The professional criminal or murderer is executed in order to eliminate iniquity and restore order, and restitution is made for other crimes to re-establish that godly and working social order which is necessary to God's creation mandate. Neither hanging a thief nor imposing a disproportionate ransom or fine on him constitutes justice. A third factor is very important also. The requirement of restitution in little things is a God-given law which makes for better relations with neighbors. The modern tendency is to overlook little things as though it constitutes nobility to do so. Thus, if a woman drops and breaks a platter belonging to her neighbor, the modern tendency is to forgive and forget. The biblical principle is to restore a sum equivalent to the platter, or the same kind if available, plus a fifth of its value as compensation. Such restitution replaces annoyance with neighborly love, for love is the fulfilling of the law. Romans 13:10. Much of the petty annoyances between friends and neighbors would be eliminated by observance of this law. By means of this law, God is clearly aware of the necessity for governing the minor problems which are so often the main factors in our lives. A fourth aspect of this law is confession. Making restitution to a neighbor is a form of confession, of course. When the neighbor is dead or has migrated and no kinsman is left to whom restitution can be made, confession is made to God through the priest. Numbers 5:5-10 emphatically insists on confession, and finally enacts also that if the individual against whom the trespass was committed has no goal, kinsman, the compensation money shall, together with the ram to be offered, devolve to the Lord, that is, be paid to the priest. There is thus a place for confession in the law. True confession does not create a mediating institution. It simply upholds the sovereignty of God's law and the necessary fact of restitution. True confession is restitution. Forgiveness is a juridical term in the Bible and means that charges are dropped because satisfaction has been rendered. Forgiveness thus means satisfaction or restitution. Confession is worthless and forgiveness invalid where restitution has not been made.